New question, the member from Ottawa South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Government Services. Speaker, I was pleased to be part of an announcement this morning in which you and the Premier spoke about our intention to introduce major enhancements in accountability for both our government and for members of this legislature.
Hear, hear.
Under Premier Wynne, our government has committed to leading by example and being as transparent and accountable as possible. Mr. Speaker, I was encouraged to hear this morning that these new proposed improvements would bring the same high level of transparency to members of this House. Since being elected to the legislature last fall, I've worked hard to bring the issue of the accountability of elected members to this House. Ontarians have a right to access in a clear way the information on how elected officials are spending their tax dollars. I was very happy to learn that the government plans to introduce new legislation that, if passed, would create a new climate of open government and enhance accountability here in Ontario. Minister, can you outline to this House how the government will be proposing that the important improvements that we will make in posting expenses mandatory for all members?
Hear, hear.
Thank you. Minister responsible for the government services.
Much, Mr. Speaker, and I really sincerely want to thank the member for Ottawa South for his advocacy on this issue. I think members are aware of the private members bill that he put forward on this. Mr. Speaker, as members are aware, today the Premier announced our proposed plan to introduce legislation to enhance accountability and transparency in government. Within that is our intention to introduce amendments which would require expense information for cabinet ministers, parliamentary assistants and opposition leaders and the respective staff to be posted online for anybody to see. As members may know, expense information for cabinet ministers, parliamentary assistants and their staff have been posted online on a voluntary basis by the government since 2010. The proposed amendments would, if passed, turn these voluntary practices into a mandatory requirement and extend the same requirement to opposition leaders and their staff. We expect the same level of transparency from everyone in the House. Mr. Speaker, at the same time, okay.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very encouraging news. Through you to the Minister, I'm glad to hear that under this proposal, all members of this House would be required to embrace the same level of accountability as members of Cabinet and parliamentary assistants. I am especially impressed that the leaders of the opposition parties would be required, if the legislation passes, to be accountable as the Premier and Cabinet ministers. Mr. Speaker, as representatives of the people, we must all hold ourselves to a higher standard.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, Ontarians not only expect transparency from their elected officials, but also from the people working in the agencies funded with their tax dollars. Mr. Speaker, in speaking to Ontarians about my private member's bill on this issue, they often ask what is being done to enhance accountability, not only for elected officials, but for officials working in agencies.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Since 2010, expense information for senior executives, appointees, and the top 5 claimants in 21 of the government's largest agencies and organizations are required to be posted under the government's Travel, Meal and Hospitality Expense Directive. Ministry senior managers are covered under this directive as well. Expense claims undergo a rigorous approval process, first within each of the organizations and then by the Integrity Commissioner. In our announcement today, we've committed to proposing new improved oversight powers of the Integrity Commissioner to review the expenses of all of Ontario's 197 classified agencies. If passed, this proposed legislation would allow the Integrity Commissioner to select any number of these agencies and review the expenses of their executives. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has committed to making the Government of Ontario the most accountable government in Canada. Measures like these would, if passed, go a long way to ensuring that Ontarians can access this important information.
New question.